Total War Warhammer 3 is a big game with lots of mechanics demanding your attention at any one time. When you're first getting started, it can be hard to know what you are missing, so today, let's count down 10 noob mistakes that you want to avoid in your campaigns. First up, we have not taking full advantage of heroes. Heroes can be some of the most powerful units in Warhammer 3, and that goes for both legendary and generic. They can give you a huge advantage in both campaign and battle, and understanding how to use each of them to the most of their abilities will be key to your success. For the most part, I like to keep heroes in my armies, as that is by far the easiest way to get value, and whilst it can seem like a waste of an army slot when you could have another entire unit, heroes often bring value through methods outside of traditional combat. For example, many melee heroes may not have the best stats in the world, but they offer bonuses to allied units, bringing in a lot of value even if they don't rack up tons of kills for themselves. Spellcasters are the same, with some being capable of raining destruction onto the battlefield and taking down hordes of enemies, but some instead throw out augments and hexes to give your units an edge and receive no credit for the value they bring. Every time you get a new hero, you want to work out their best use for both campaign and battle and figure out how to use both of these aspects to your advantage. Do not sleep on the campaign actions either. Assassinate is great for getting rid of heroes, but there's a ton of other actions to slow down enemy armies to make it easier to catch up to them, damaging enemy garrisons to make the following siege a lot easier, and even stealing tech can be useful to gain more bonuses for your faction. There are certainly actions that are far more directly powerful than others, but understanding what each action does and when it is useful will never be bad knowledge to keep in your back pocket. The next mistake is ignoring diplomacy. I know the game is called Total War, but in war it's important to have allies, and for at least 75% of factions in game, this will always be true. For most campaigns, you want to make use of diplomacy, if for nothing else but trade agreements. These are basically free money, and the profits will only increase with every new trade partner you make, so there isn't really a downside. Non-aggression pacts and military access agreements are also very useful when you simply want some reassurance that a faction won't declare war on you. Alliances are a little trickier since most of the time they end up being more hassle than they are worth, but they can still be worth considering if the other party is a powerful enough partner. The bottom line is you do not want to ignore diplomacy and get wrapped up in total war. At the very least, you're missing out on free money, so if for no other reason than that, it's worth keeping an eye on. Our next tip is making sure you don't forget about regiments of renown. I know I do this one all the time because I like my armies to look neat, but regiments of renown are often some of the most powerful units that you can recruit at that moment in time. They're souped up versions of regular units, often with a bunch of improvements like more powerful stats or unique abilities. You can also recruit them without the need for military buildings, so they are super convenient and most of the time have a pretty reasonable price tag for something so strong. Speaking of which, you can get these videos ad-free for a pretty reasonable price tag by becoming a member at the join button below. Traditionally, you unlock these as your legendary lord levels up, so you will slowly unlock more of them as the game goes on, and you should really be making use of them as often as you can. It's so easy to forget, but they really are worth it, no matter how difficult they can sometimes be to fit into your armies. Speaking of armies, I think a lot of us can say that our positioning in battle isn't always the best. It can be tempting to place ranged units a little too far forward so that they can start shooting earlier, but in the end, you'll still have to awkwardly move them back through your melee troops, often resulting in some level of mess once the lines clash. Equally, you can place units so far back to keep them safe that they can't get much done. And this doesn't just go for ranged infantry, but they're just the best example I can think of for poor positioning. Cavalry also require careful positioning, not just to keep them alive, but also to deal any amount of damage. Charging from the right angle at the right time can drastically change how effective they will be, and understanding all of this will make your battles that much easier to win. I don't have time to go into the nuances of how to use every single unit in the game, but the bottom line is you want to make sure every unit is exactly where you need them to be well in advance of when you need them there. All battles are is hitting a series of marks at the right time, and if you do that more than the enemy, you will easily come out on top. Just stay reactive to what your opponent is doing, err on the side of caution, and if everything descends into chaos, resist the urge to Control A and right click. Unless you're playing as the Beastman, then that's just kind of the strat. This one is pretty similar to the last, but I think it bears repeating. Ranged units of all kinds are usually the most powerful units on the battlefield. They can sling arrows, bullets, and more across vast distances to tear enemies to pieces, with minimal risk to the units themselves. However, these units need to be able to shoot at their targets to be effective, and the exact requirements for this vary from unit to unit. Some, like archers, have a curved firing arc, meaning they can shoot almost directly upwards and over any obstacles or allied units to hit their targets. Others, like gunners, have a more flat firing arc, meaning they need a clear line of sight between them and their target. The firing arc of the unit depends what targets are best to aim for, where to position the unit in combat, and the risk of friendly fire. Your units won't intentionally shoot at your own troops, but if they're aiming for an enemy and your unit gets in the way, it can happen and obviously is not what you want. You can make assumptions based on the type of unit, the look of their weapons and their damage, but the only way to learn a firing arc is to use them in combat and figure it out. Once you know this, you can figure out how to best use them to keep the damage coming and not onto your own troops. I think spells can be one of the most underrated parts of any army, and that sounds absurd because everyone knows just how strong a spell can be. However, I'm of the belief that powerful damage spells like the Foot of Gork or Flaming Head end up getting all the credit, when the real value can sometimes come from something a lot less flashier. There are tons of spells in Warhammer 3 and many of them deal no damage but can still get a tremendous amount of value in combat. Hex spells allow you to weaken enemies in a variety of ways and drop all kinds of stats to soften them up for your units to finish them off. Inversely, augments can empower your own troops to new heights, increasing various stats to keep them both alive and elevate their damage. And the best part about these types of spells is that as the game goes on and units get more powerful, they only get more value. Giving swordsmen a buff to their attack and damage is neat, but giving that same buff to greatswords can turn them into a real meat grinder. And inversely, weakening enemy Skaven slaves is kinda pointless, but dropping the stats of some black orcs mean you're severely weakening the powerhouse of the enemy army. Damage spells are great, but never sleep on all the other kinds. You're missing out on a big world of powerful magic that often comes at a fraction of the cost of some of those high tier damage spells. This is a quick one, but I really think it's something everyone should master when they first get started with the game. Your armies can do a hell of a lot of things in a single turn, and making sure you use every single one of them will be key to optimizing your success. So first of all, they can move, which yes, I know is obvious, but we have to start somewhere. With that movement, they can attack both armies and settlements, and provided they have enough movement range, they can do this multiple times per turn. This obviously comes with added risk, since each battle will inevitably inflict casualties on the army, but it can be worth it depending on the situation. This means they can also take settlements in that same turn, which does eat up their movement range, but we're not done yet. Lastly, they can also recruit, and the units you have access to will vary based on where they are, but especially early on, it is always worth filling up your armies as fast as you can. You can always swap out the weak units later, so prioritize getting the biggest, most powerful army you can as soon as possible. Really make sure that you are getting the most you can out of your armies, as they can get you a ton of value outside of fighting a single battle per turn. Speaking of armies, the way they move around the map can be just as important as where they're going. Movement stances vary from faction to faction, but you will always have a few choices, and understanding how and when to use each one will be incredibly important to get the most value out of your armies that you can. To get an obvious one out of the way, Force March will allow you to move across the map much faster by increasing your army's movement range. This does come at the cost of being unable to retreat if attacked, and all units being hit with a Vigor debuff, so it does have some risks, but is still super useful if you know the path is safe. Raiding Stance similarly wins your army, but it now allows you to steal gold from the provinces you move through. Obviously the owners won't be a big fan of this, but it's a good way to earn some extra cash and potentially destabilize a province. Plus, it usually makes you immune to attrition, so can be a good way to move through some difficult terrain. Encampment Stance drastically reduces movement range, but allows your army to heal in most areas of the map. On top of this, you can usually globally recruit, gain some slight stats improvements, and ignore attrition, so it's a pretty sweet deal. There are more than this and a bunch of unique options, but the bottom line is familiarize yourself with your options and make sure you're making the most out of them whenever you can. The one movement stance I didn't mention is perhaps the most powerful. Ambush Stance is available to most factions and is probably one of the most underused movement stances in the game. If you place your army in a choke point that enemy armies are likely to move through and adopt Ambush Stance, there is a chance that they will walk straight into your army, giving you a huge advantage in the following battle. If you bait the trap by building a bunch of stuff in a weak settlement with your army lying in wait, there is a very good chance that the AI won't be able to resist such a juicy morsel and walks right into your lap. You can bait the AI in other ways, like with weak armies, attacking their settlements as a decoy, and more. But the bottom line is, you want to funnel them into an area where you can place an army in ambush to capitalize on their reaction. Baiting also works in battle, though it's normally a bit more of a risk, since the bait tends to end up being a bit of a sacrificial unit. But if you can draw enemy attention in one direction and open up another for your army, then it can be worth it depending on the situation. Traps of all kinds should be used when playing as every single faction. They may not be the most honourable path to victory, but they will make the journey a whole lot easier, so can come in very useful. Last but certainly not least, we have bad settlement priorities, and this one could not be more simple. When building up settlements and provinces, you have a lot of choices of what to build first, and your choice should always be based on what that particular province and that particular settlement needs the most. For example, if it's in a pretty safe area with a low likelihood of being attacked, you should almost always focus growth to get it to max size as fast as possible and unlock all those more powerful buildings. However, if it's instead in a heavily corrupted low-control hellhole sharing a border with the enemy, maybe you should rush some garrisons and infrastructure buildings so you can hold on to it in the first place. It never hurts to have a default way to build up each new settlement and province, but you want to be prepared to deviate from this plan if the occasion calls for it. Build for the province you have, not the province you want, because chances are, if you don't, you won't have the province for long. And if you want to know which races in Warhammer 3 need a rework the most, then check out this video to see the top 10.